Melasi. Welcome to another video. This one is also like similar to what I talked about before, but where I talked a little bit about my own upbringing in a white society. But I also wanted to continue that in all Black existence in white spaces. And today's subject is one I'm very excited about because I think it's an important one. It's basically on Black mental health in white spaces. If you're new here, welcome. I'm May, and I talk about issues surrounding decolonization. I talk about issues around Black identity, Black consciousness, human consciousness, colonization, anything that has to do with themes within that realm. I really love to talk about from a holistic and intersectional perspective. So I hope that this, of course, gets you thinking, creates a dialogue, gets you reflecting, and as always, I always welcome your perspectives to share them as well in the comment sections. If I have forgotten something, if you like to add something, if you have some things you want to share with the community, please do so. And thank you again for tuning back for another video. Okay, so in my last video I talked about growing up obviously in a white community, in a white country, in a white environment, in a white system. And on my channel I am very aware of obviously the white supremacist system and how it works, and how racism and oppression are not things that just happen randomly, but they're almost engineered into systems. Maybe not every single person is an active member or agent of those oppressive systems, but most people do contribute in some way, and most people are either perpetuating the oppression or being victims of that oppression. So when it comes to Black beings in white contexts, I also wanted to reflect on something that Bell Hooks also talks about when we talk about systems versus individuals. When we talk about systems, we are aware that we are all part of a working system. For example, the fact that we all use money, we all live in a capitalistic society, we all contribute to more or less the exploitation of nature, of cheap labor, of so on. We are all a part of a system that is created in a way that does not always benefit everybody. It's a hierarchical system rather than a secular system, rather than an ecosystem. It's one of exploiting the most amount of people for the benefit of the least amount of people. So when we talk about systems, we are focusing on things that keep a certain way of living going, but at the same time that does not take away our individual responsibility within those systems, because we all perpetuate them or are ignorant to them or benefit from them or are affected by them. And the more aware we become of how those systems work, the more aware we can become of our own empowerment within those systems and how we can dismantle them, whether in big scale or small scales. Something that I try to do on my little channel is just getting you thinking and hopefully doing different things than you would have done before, because you have new information, new perspective, or you get curious about something and you go ahead and study about that. So basically, when I talk about mental health in white spaces or Black mental health within a system of white supremacists, wherever that might be, what I really want to reflect on is the idea that obviously even for my own awakening, I would say that it took me a long time to even be aware of such a thing. Like, it's kind of like teaching a fish about water. They live in it, it's the norm, so you don't expect anything strange of it. I think for me, things that really helped me to really open my mind and realize the water that I was in and why it wasn't working as well for me as maybe other people in the water was, yeah, the small subtle ways that you become aware of systems, you understand racism. Of course, like in a society like this, you get introduced to it, like most people understand sexism because that's something that white women can relate to in a white society, but then racism is a whole other level because of the fact that we are obviously a minority in a place like Denmark. There's not a lot of people of color, so already that puts it at a disadvantage, but then you include that into other forms of being marginalized, whether it's through your sexuality, whether it's through your religion, whether it's through how you dress, whether it's through, yeah, your ethnicity, yeah, your color, whatever it might be. Like, those things become complicated. And what I have noticed, I think, for me in my own mental health is the awareness of, again, the water that surrounds me, the context of my existence. Because when you're not aware of that, I think you live in a way of, it's a double way of living. I kind of feel like Black people by nature, they have to role shift constantly in order to exist in white supremacist systems, because there's no way you can be your authentic self everywhere. There's not space for that. And I think like even I think in America they call it code switching, but I think it's something all Black people have internalized and they know how to do without even knowing it. Like you can even go back to say my own country of Uganda, where maybe the white supremacist system is embedded through the traces of colonialism that still govern the country, which is interesting because I was recently reading a quote by a Pan-African academia or author or thinker, and he was talking about how even through colonization, when they created the education system, the religious systems, when they created the governing systems, all the systems were actually proactive solution to the fact in case countries ever got independence. Because even though the person was now in an independent, uncolonized country, their thinking was still French or Portuguese or English, their school education was still French, their spirit was still French, their aspirations were still French or English. So colonization didn't have to exist there visibly as a white man oppressing the African, but it was embedded through the systems that they called neutral, you know, just best practices. So I think that's also quite interesting when we think about how we as Black people living in white contexts just easily get embedded into an idea of it's just the norm that you code switch, it's just the norm that you adapt the way you speak when white people are around, or you go to spaces where your Blackness has to be toned down a bit, where you have to be more mummified. And by that I mean that just the fact that you have to be more aware of white fragility. Even before you know that that word exists, you're quite empathetic to not making white people uncomfortable, whereas they're not as empathetic to making you uncomfortable because they've never actually had to do that. And in this dominant system, they actually don't have to care about how you feel. But when we do talk about mental health, I think things I do reflect on is also even like the Stockholm syndrome when it comes to racism or race. And I think about it how Black people, even when you do become aware of the racist system that you live in and how it's perpetuated, even how you participate in it, maybe through anti-Blackness, through simple things like just the fact that you might trust a white business more than you trust your own brother or sister's business when you're shopping or when you're doing business. Like there's different ways in which you yourself have become allied to that system that oppresses you, because at least in that system you know your place. Whereas I think actually pursuing liberty and pursuing to be a free person and pursuing to even dare to take up space as fully as yourself is an intimidating thing if you are not aware, if you've not been raised to live in that way. So when it comes again to mental health, which is something that I also want to talk about when it comes to, what was it I wanted to say? I don't know if you guys know this podcast called Fear of the Free Child. I'll put it in the description link, and it talks about how to raise free children, because freedom and liberty is something we as people of color actually have to practice. It's not the same definition as say white people might have for freedom and liberty. And yeah, I'd also like to recommend a video I made on why I choose liberty over equality, but also affirmation for formerly oppressed people. Because in all that, I'm making it a clear acclamation to what freedom and liberty means when it's not defined by the people you are bargaining it with. And as I always say, I don't think any freedom should be negotiated, because once you start negotiating freedom, it's no longer freedom, it's something you're renting. And if somebody can give you something, obviously they have the power to take it away from you. The biggest form of freedom is you being able to decide how free you are and not having to ask for that permission. But we all live in different contexts of oppression, and therefore what that might look like for me is totally different from somebody, say, living in a very racist state in some place, or a very racist country where they're overpowered by the amount of people who are against them, versus the kind of people who either are indifferent or indifferent or are for them. So I think for my own mental health, with my own being conscious, what I have come to realize is that safe spaces matter. And safe spaces matter in so much more ways than just here's a little space we go to talk, and that's where you can be fully yourself. For example, in Copenhagen, there's a wonderful woman called Fatima, and she runs this women's circle that is, I think, every Friday, and Black women come there and they talk. It's a place of no judgment. It's just a place of venting and sisterhood. And I think it's so beautiful. I wish something like that also existed for Black men, but I think that would be an initiative they have to do for themselves. But I'm happy that Black women are doing stuff like that. So you come there and you can be fully, you can talk fully. There is no need to minimize yourself so that you can exist to the comfort of other people, even though it is at the detriment of your own comfort. And that's also something I want to talk about when we talk about mental health. Living in constant repression is not something that we think a lot about because we've normalized it so much, to the point where it's just how we live. We just think like, yeah, having terms as code switching or having cones, or white people don't understand that, so I'm gonna tone it down, blah blah blah. But all those things are you constantly repressing who you are because you live in a society that does not fully embrace or welcome that. And those things do have repercussions to your mental well-being, to even your physical well-being, because the mind and body are connected, and it's a more obviously holistic way of seeing how you are affected by not the way you live but the way you think and the space you can occupy in the world. And I think another thing I like to add to this is obviously generational trauma, which is something that science cannot trace in DNA, that science cannot study in passed down DNA, in the sense that we can inherit the trauma of our ancestors through our DNA. And since I always say that there has never been an effort, a mass effort of Black resurrection in the sense of mental health, in the sense of physical, spiritual health, despite past racism or past colonialism, things just went on. I always like to say that, okay, let's say colonization ended on Sunday and Monday everybody had to go back to work and school. There was no, okay, let's get a month off, a year off, and let's really decolonize, like clean house and start fresh. And because that was never done, we're kind of like, it's not that we're not healing and not growing and not having better mental spaces, but it's happening at such a, what do you call it, as a random perspective, as a random thing. It's not something we're actively putting in place for each other or our communities are putting in place. It's only, I think, within the last few years, which is something I'm very excited about, because even I like becoming a holistic and intersectional life coach, which is something I'll talk about later on, but it's something I'm very excited about because I think those things matter, like having people who can work through healing from an intersectional perspective, from a holistic perspective, that understand you beyond, oh, you're just another human with mental issues. No, you have a different context of existence. If you're a Black person, if you're an African person, if you have familial trauma, it's not going to be the same as a white person with familial trauma, family trauma. So being aware of those differences, which is another thing I preach a lot on this channel, not to fear differences, but to understand what they mean for the context of your existence, because if you ignore them and pretend everything is just the same gray tone, you will be messing up and missing out on opportunities of your own healing. So for me, when I move through a white spaces, which is my workspace, which is the society I live in, I'm quite aware of what to expect, but I'm also quite aware of how to restore my own energy. For example, just like, things like having safe groups and safe interactions. And for me, that is even like having friendships where you are on the same level of growth, or maybe somebody can inspire you more, you can inspire them, and you both understand the context of your existence to a certain degree that you can hold space for each other's discovery and growth. I think those are so important. And then obviously your family situation. I'm lucky that I come from a family that has grown and progressed. Like, we've all grown in different areas, but we've progressed in a similar speed, to the fact that we are quite comfortable being around each other and expressing frustration at work. Nobody's in denial, nobody is in play along to get along. Everybody kind of has a mentality of, okay, this is what's going on, this is our action plan, this is where we plan to be in a few years. So I like that idea that we are aware, but we're not stuck in the, oh, this is how it is, it sucks, but what are you gonna do? But it's a very proactive approach, and I love to be part of movements that are also like that. Like, okay, here's the problem, what are we gonna do about it? How do we move forward and fix stuff like that? So when it comes to, of course, my own mental health, that's something I really value. Safe spaces, also rituals and daily practices, helping myself, center in my Blackness with joy. It can be as simple as maybe I read reading literature or watching movies or engaging with music that is pro-Black and Afro-positive and Afro-loving and Afro-organic joy. There's a lot of things that you can engage with that are not just going to leave you entertained but fulfilled, and I'm a huge believer in the holistic influence of visuals and music and sound and atmosphere on our well-being. It's not just woo-woo, it's literally scientifically proven, but not even just Eurocentric scientifically proven. It's something our ancestors have always believed in, and they've always created art very intentional. So I kind of try to interact with art that is quite intentional as well. Don't get it twisted, sometimes I like a little bit of bad stuff, like just, you know, but it's not my daily consumption. It's kind of like food. You're not like a purist, but you know what you need to stay alkaline and balanced and whole. So that's what I do also for my mental health. Be aware of what you watch, what you engage with, the people you hang out with. I would definitely say, being a Black girl and growing up with groups of maybe white friends, and now slowly transitioning to a more diversified group of friends that are a lot of colored people, a lot of consciously aware people, my mental health has improved tremendously, because you are on the same level. It's not just that we're talking about issues all the time, but we know that there is space for that, and that makes a huge difference. There's space for that in case you want to talk about it, but we also have fun. We also celebrate joy, because I think that's also part of being rebellious and revolutionary, is of course, like Audre Lorde says, to self-care, self-preserve, and not just for survival's sake, but for thriving's sake, which is something I talk a lot about also in my own holistic practices. So all of those things are quite important, obviously. And also even, care about the relationships you take, care about your getaway plan, escape plan. Like, what do you have to put in place? Okay, you understand the system, you understand how it benefits, you understand all that, but what can you do? And it doesn't have to be tomorrow. You can say, my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan. Where would you like to see yourself to be more independent, and also to take more of your people with you in a way, to inspire, to bring that forward as well. So I think having that mindset that, okay, we're going through something, instead of this is life, what can you do? And also not being ignorant, and also knowing that being educated about your reality is not something that should depress you, but just give you a map in a way that, okay, what can I do about that? What can I use that for? And also, don't engage with everybody who talks about social issues. Is not necessarily healthy for your mental health, because the way some people engage with it is very defeatist. It's very, very negative and pessimistic, and you'd watch it and then that's it, and you go, okay, now what? I have all this awful information and nothing to do with it. So also be very proactive in that sense as well, that just because you want to be educated and be aware, what does that do for you? How do you use that? And pick your battles. Not everything that happens in your setting needs a reaction. Sometimes things happen, you'll be like, that's not gonna be on my receipt today, so I'm just gonna let that slide. And sometimes you have to stand up and if you feel like that would make a bigger difference, do it. Or use your energy in places that kind of benefits your progression in a holistic way, rather than just a temporary reactionary way. So even if you are in white contexts and white spaces, you have to be very masterful with your mind and your reactions and your strategy and where you're going and what you want out of it. basically that's it. That's what I wanted to share. I hope that is of benefit. I would like you guys to also share how you manage your existence, your Black existence in white spaces. What do you do when it comes to relationships, when it comes to love? That's another thing. I think having a partner who's raised Black and is half Black, that also helps, because the conversations we have, they can have other issues, but that's one less issue they have in them, and that is a great help in everyday life. You don't want to be experiencing racism and then going home and having to explain racism and then defend why you're not being emotional, which is, this is a real reality. Like, that's too tiring. And some people can handle that, or sometimes you find partners that are willing to be proactive about their own education, but sometimes you find people that just want you to feed them, and because that's what they're used to, or they don't feel like there's a big need for them to be educated because the system works great for them, so why should they care? So all of those things matter, basically. Anyway guys, that's all I wanted to share. Yeah, I look forward to the other videos that I'll make in this, like Black existence in white spaces. But I hope you've enjoyed this one. I hope you're well, and as always, be kind, but don't take no bullshit either. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye!
Akanamali, koro tanayo, ke yoke ginto egio.